Hey dudes, how is it going? I'm watching Agent 327 for no particular reason, again and again. And welcome to the new episode of Blender Quick Tips. That is Gleb, Alexandrov for creativeshrimp.com. Have fun. If you're just getting into Blender, make sure to watch the previous episodes of Quick Tips on this YouTube channel. The links are in the description as usual. And look at this. Keep watching, feel free to share, blah blah blah. The first shrimpy tip is the ray visibility trick. So imagine you'd like to remove this object from the reflections. How to do that? It's very simple, just go to the object properties. And here we can disable the ray visibility for diffuse or for the glossy to remove it from the reflections. Or we can disable the camera visibility to remove it from the camera. But it will still be visible in the glossy surfaces, and the diffuse rays will be intact as well. So we can have the reflection without the actual object visible, which is kind of cool. Number 2, you can spice up your renders by using a fisheye camera instead of the usual boring camera. Let's go to the camera settings and switch it to panoramic. And here we have the field of view setting. I'm going to crank it up to make sure that the image covers the whole screen. And we can adjust the lens. Right now it's set to 8mm, which makes up for the extreme fisheye. We can also use the mirror ball, but make sure to set the X and Y resolution to the same amount of pixels, 1920 in this case. And finally we can set the panorama type to equirectangular if we want to render the spherical panorama. And the Y resolution should be the half of the X resolution. This way we'll get the perfect 360 degrees spherical panorama right after hitting the render button. Number 3 is save startup file. So when you launch Blender, you see something like that. The boring default cube, the camera and so on, and we can delete everything. Set the cursor to center, set the render settings however we want. For example, lower the bounces, set the star resolution to 512, set the tile size. And to not set it by hand every time, we can just save the startup settings by going to File, Save Startup File. Now we'll get this scene every time we launch Blender. Okay, number 4, Bleeding Edge Blender Builds. You can go to blender.org, download, and if you feel like testing the alien technology, the cutting edge Blender builds, you can go ahead and download it from this page. And another place to search for the cutting-edge builds is graphical.org. But beware, don't save anything important using these builds, because they are kind of unstable. Still, give yourself a chance to try Blender 2.8 and the new Eevee renderer. It's in development, but it's awesome! And by the way, watch the full video on Zacharias Reinhardt channel. Number 5, how to make a turntable animation. At first it seems like it's a very easy task, but it could prove to be very tedious. So here's how we can do it. We have a spline and a camera. First let's select the spline, then the camera. Hit Ctrl-Shift-C and choose Follow Path. It will add the Follow Path constraint. Now I'm pressing Alt-G to reset the position. What we have to do now is aim the camera, so I'm rotating it on the Z-axis. And in the constraint settings we can set the offset to animate camera along this spline. Or we can just click on the Animate Path button. So basically, that's how you can make the turntable animation in Blender. Okay, and the next one is a cool modeling feature that is called Grid Fill. First, let's draw the outline of the future shape. So what I'm doing here is just extruding individual vertices by hitting E on the keyboard. And we have to make sure that the opposite sides have the same amount of vertices. And now I can hit Ctrl-F and select Grid Fill. Then hit F6 and we can tweak the span and the offset. But I think that the default settings were right for this shape. And after that we can throw in some layers of subdivision and maybe extrude this shape. So that was the Grid Fill. Okay, the productivity tip number 7. We can click and drag to select multiple fields. For example, we can tweak each field individually, or just copy paste the values, or we can click and drag down and then type in the value, or just click and drag down, then drag right. And basically where we have these multiple fields, multiple consecutive fields, we can select it by clicking and dragging. or by holding Shift and dragging. Number 8, array modifier and radial symmetry. So here we have the cylinder, and I'm selecting the third part of it, and I'm hitting P and separate selection, and delete the rest. Now I'm creating the empty object, and adding the array modifier to the cylinder, setting the count to 2, enabling the object offset, and picking this empty object. Now we can rotate and move this empty, and the array modifier will follow the rotation and the position of this empty. And technically we just created the radial symmetry. Now we can hit Tab to enter the edit mode, tweak the initial object, and for example we can increase the edges by hitting Shift E to make it align perfectly. That is radial symmetry by using the array modifier with the object offset enabled. 9. Math expressions. Honestly, did you know that the Blender numeric fields accept the math expressions? Yeah, it can. Blender can do many surprising things. So for example, we can click on the subdivision surface levels and type in the expression 2 plus 1 divided by 2 plus 0.5, and it will calculate it for you. Or we can type something like this and get the number. Alright, and the next productivity tip is how to use frame step to skip frames during animation and why to do this. So imagine you animated the camera and now you want to preview it, but each frame takes infinity to render. So you'll just set the resolution to 35%, for example, and you set the frame step to 2 or to 3. That means that Blender will skip 2 frames during rendering and render each third frame. And now I'm choosing the video format, AVJPEG, and defining the outputs. So technically this should render 3 times faster. And you would be able to preview the results using render play rendered animation or just press Ctrl F11. Of course you will see a slight stuttering effect, but yet this is a lot better than waiting 3 times longer. Definitely. Number 11. This is a fun one. We can have a custom bokeh shape. So we enable the depth of field in the camera settings and cranked up the size, and unsurprisingly we get this circular shape, and we can make it into any kind of shape. That's how we do it. We position the cutout shape in front of the camera, just like we do in real life, and the smart S algorithm of cycles will do everything else for you. Alright, give us the next one. Stamp renders with metadata. The features like these are often overlooked, and we shouldn't fall into this trap. So let's enable the stamp output checkbox. Enable lens information. And we're good to go. We can hit render. And one more thing that I will do is increase the font size. Because the text is tiny, it makes my eyes bleed. Let's set the font size to 20. And it's a lot better. You can see all the necessary info stamped into the render. The tip number 13 is anti-aliasing. Filter types. So if you come over to the film settings, you will see this filter type. It can be set to Gaussian, to Blackman-Harris, and to box, and we can also change the width. And you can see how it affects the render. Honestly, it's a very cryptic, very obscure feature. You just have to test it for yourself. And on the Grexal's website called Adaptive Samples, there is a cool comparison image of the different anti-aliasing types. In my opinion, they all look kind of similar, but the box one sucks. Number 14, override material. Often what I want to do when I'm making my scenes is that I want to preview just the lighting information without materials and the stuff like that. So in the render layers tab, we can choose the override material, then click on this render layer button in the viewport. Now we can comprehend what's going on with lighting. Let's move on to the next one. How to consolidate textures into a folder. Let's say we have a bunch of textures in our scene, and each one of them resides in a different folder. What we can do is go File, External Data, and automatically pack into Blend. Now it's packed into the Blend file, and now we go External Data, unpack into Files, use files in current directory, and create when necessary. And right near your save file, we will have this texture folder with all the textures. Nice and clean. Number 16, outliner options. To organize your scene a little bit more, you can choose, for example, visible layers in the outliner to show only the visible layers. Or you can choose selected to show only the selected objects. Or maybe we could switch to the similar types. And now if we select the spotlight, the outliner will show every other light in the scene. These filters just help to keep track of the scene. That's why it's worth paying attention to. Now let the fun begin. How to extrude the individual faces. Let's select random, then switch the transform orientation to normal, and if we hit E to extrude, we'll extrude every polygon, but not individual polygon. We can hit Alt E and select individual faces. Right, the next thing that we can do is switch to the individual origins mode in the pivot point. And now we can scale it up or scale it down, maybe extrude it once again. That is a very nice feature to know. Once again, just press Shift E and extrude individual faces. Number 18, curve from mesh. We can draw a bunch of vertices and then press Alt C and select curve from mesh. That will convert it to curve. Now hit T and set the spline type to Bezier, and then press V and convert the handle type to automatic. This gives us an opportunity to smooth out the curve. For example, you can select all points, hit W and select smooth, and smooth it a few times more. So here we go. Number 19, how to snap selection to cursor. First we select the cube, then we place the 3D cursor on the surface of this object, then press Shift S, selection to cursor. And then we can just place the 3D cursor and hit Shift R to repeat the last action. That's how to align one object to the surface of another object. And if we have two objects, we should use not this selection to cursor, but the third one, selection to cursor with offset, or else the objects will be placed on top of each other. Alright, the next tip is how to move vertices without distorting the texture. Or maybe how to move edges or polygons. Let's select the edge. And if we press G 2 times to slide edge, we'll see that the texture gets distorted. But if we press F6, we can enable this correct UVs checkbox. And look at this. Press G 2 times to slide edge and oh my goodness. The next thing is how to rotate edges by 45 degrees after triangulating. First, let's select the vertical edges. Press Ctrl E and select rotate edge clockwise. But actually we'll do a slightly different thing. Let's select every edge and press space and search for triangulate faces. That will, well, triangulate every face. Now let's select this vertical set of faces. Shift G, select similar direction. And now press X and dissolve edges. And I don't know why I like rotating edges so much that I include this tip into every collection of tips. If you have any idea, let me know in the comments. I would be so damn happy to hear that. And now I'll give you number 22, dissolve edges. So basically almost any edge can be dissolved without ruining the geometry. So if this edge doesn't contribute to the curvature, you can just press Ctrl X and it will be instantly dissolved. And this may come in handy if you want to have a clean geometry composed of n-gons, or for example, if you want to bevel the cube like this. And at the same time, you want to get rid of the excessive geometry. And you select these edge rings and you hit Ctrl X and they get dissolved. And you get a clean, game engine friendly geometry. Number 23, the knife tool can cut through. Usually when you press K and you just make a cut like this, it won't show up on the other side of the mesh. And to cut through, you just have to press K, then press Z. And that will enable the cut through mode. And now every cut will pierce through the geometry. You can do the same thing by selecting all polygons and pressing Shift K. And you can, for example, select these edges and press V to rip them and hit P to separate the selection, and technically now you have two objects. And another cool thing that you can press K to invoke the knife tool and press C to constrain it, draw a straight line or 90 degrees line. Now let's talk about linked flat faces. And we can, for example, select this polygon, hit Alt Shift Ctrl F, then press F6 and tweak the threshold. And that will grow or shrink the selection based on the normal of the polygon that you selected initially. So you select the polygon, hit Ctrl Alt Shift F, and tweak the sharpness or the threshold. So wherever you have a flat area of faces, this function can make your life a little bit easier. And that's what we are aiming for. Next, the tip number 25, volume sampling optimizations. The first thing that I want to point out that volume scatter should be added to the volume absorption to get the physically correct results. Alright, now let's talk about the optimizations. In the geometry tab, we have this step size setting, and if you turn it down to a lower value, you'll get a higher quality, but the longer render times and the less fluent viewport. The max steps setting works the other way. The higher it is, the longer it takes to render. So let's turn it down to 64, and let's crank up the step size to 0.5, and the viewport got faster, and it's just obvious. And when we set it to 1, we'll lose some quality, but the viewport is super fast. That's how we can deal with the complex volume shaders. Okay, the next thing is color ramp. First of all, it has different interpolation settings. You can switch it from linear to cardinal or B-spline for the smooth gradients. So try it out, maybe it will give you some interesting results. And secondly, you can add the new flags by holding Control and clicking on this line. And what you can do now is drag them around to, say, color correct the initial noise texture. Also, we can colorize these stops, and we can use it to colorize pretty much everything. So just one node gives you a lot of stuff. 27, auto smooth angle. If you open the left tool shelf by pressing T and select smooth, you'll see that the object looks kind of weird. And in this panel, you can enable auto smooth to get back the sharp angles. And you can define the sharpness by tweaking this slider. So if you'd like to have more rounded look, just crank it up. Also, what we can do is go to the edit mode, select the edge ring or edge loop, press Ctrl E and select mark sharp. And that will tell Blender that these edges must be sharp in any circumstances, no matter what. Oh, I like this one. Export paper model straight out of Blender. So here we have this model, not very fancy. Now we need to enable export paper model add-on, go into the edge mode and quickly create some UV islands. For example, select this set of edges, mark seam, mark another seam, and maybe one more here. You can do it by pressing Ctrl E and selecting mark seam. Then we can try to preview how it will be unwrapped by creating a new image, selecting everything, hitting U, and selecting unwrap. But the add-on will do its own unwrap anyway. So let's go export, paper model, and if the dimensions in Blender units are off, we'll get the error. And then we'll have to make it smaller, and export again, and it will give us this cool outline so we could reproduce it with paper. Now that's the add-on. The next tip is dynamic topology. Look at this, it's just a cube, which has 4 polygons, and when we enter the sculpt mode and enable the topo, which is dynamic topology, we can sculpt it right away without subdividing it first. It will get subdivided dynamically on the fly. We can change the mode of this tool from subdivide collapse to just subdivide edges. This way the dynamic topology thing will keep adding the details, not taking the distance from the camera into account. So basically this gives us the creative freedom, and the potential drawback is that the geometry will be very messy. So we can use it for sketching, and for the final model, some red topology will be needed. But in my opinion, that's totally worth it. And oh my goodness, that's already tip number 30. Recalculate normals. So when we extrude polygon, we can extrude it in one direction and in other direction. And these may lead to flipped geometry. And by the end of the day, the model can have flipped polygons and okay polygons. And if you enable backface culling, you'll see this mess. And especially if you're going to export it to the game engine, this will be a nightmare. So let's select all polygons and recalculate normals. And that will re-normalize every polygon and fix it for you. Another quick tip is radial symmetry for sculpting. So I'll start with this cylinder cap. Go into the sculpt mode, select the clay brush, and to enable radial symmetry, we should go over there to the symmetry menu, enable the X mirror, and crank up the number of iteration in X, Y, and Z. Or in this particular example, we'll need just Z iterations, so let's set everything to 1 and Z to 64. And now we can start sculpting the radial details. Some kind of a mechanical stuff. A nice little feature that I love. It's a freeform modeling for nerds. Let's stay for a while in the sculpting realm. How to lock area plane for the trim brush. To achieve a ZBrush style trim effect, let's choose the Scrape Peaks brush. Turn the strength up to 1. Then we can start sculpting, and it will behave like the polish brush in ZBrush. So we can sculpt the smooth, curvy, hard surface transitions. But if we fix the area plane by clicking on this icon, the brush will start to cut off the geometry in a very hard surface way. Great for sculpting the mechanical shapes, stones and whatever. 33 is Blender Sync add-on. So Blender has this Blender Sync add-on that allows us to synchronize user preferences, key maps, add-ons between the different versions of Blender, so it's very convenient. You just need to download this add-on from Blender Cloud and you will be good to go. The next one is linear interpolation of keyframes. If we just set up 2 keyframes for the camera movement, for example, set the keyframe for the location, move the camera, and set another keyframe. And then if you play back the animation, you'll notice that it slowly starts, then goes full speed, and then slowly ends. And if you want to just have linear kind of animation, go to Graph Editor, select all the keyframes. Here you can see that they are kind of curvy. So select all keyframes, press T, and set the interpolation to linear. And that will make the movement linear, without gradually speeding up and slowing down. To align the camera to the polygon, or rather align the viewport to the polygon. So select the polygon first, which will serve as a reference point for your camera or for the viewport. Then press Shift and 7 on the numpad, or Shift 3 on the numpad if you want the viewport to be perpendicular to that polygon, or Control Shift and 7 if you want to place camera from other side. 36 orthographic camera. How to render things in the isometric view? That's very easy. You just have to switch from perspective to orthographic, and that will make parallel lines be perfectly parallel without converging into perspective. And you can tweak orthographic scale to kind of position camera closer or farther away. And finally, Blender can import and export FBX format. Something to keep in mind if you want to import models from 3ds Max or export to some game engine. But first you have to enable import-export FBX add-on. And also you can set your theme to 3ds Max. Oh my goodness. That was Gleb, Alexandrov for CreativeShrimp.com. Creative Shrimp is the place where artists go to learn tips and tricks about computer graphics, arts, whatever, and coffee brewing. Long live Blender, open source, and all that stuff, just to watch cool movies. Stay tuned, make sure to share this video with other nerds and watch the previous episodes of Blender Quick Tips, and see you next time!